Hello and welcome to the Sacral Circle, where we are healing sexual trauma collectively and lovingly. I'm your host, Janie Terrazas, and I'll be interviewing individuals from all walks of life who have faced sexual trauma or abuse in one form or another and triumphed over their adversity. On every episode, a guest will deliver inspirational support, words of comfort, and empowering healing advice. They'll courageously share how their experiences impacted their lives and what they did to reclaim their mind, body, heart, and soul. Be sure to subscribe to my podcast, The Sacral Circle. Just search Sacred Stories on iTunes. I want to thank our listeners for joining us today on The Sacral Circle, the self-love haven where we leave judgment at the door. And today I'm very grateful and blessed to have the wonderful Patricia S. Castillo. She is a licensed master social worker and co-founder of the P.E.A.C.E Initiative. P.E.A.C.E is an acronym for putting an end to abuse through community efforts, a nonprofit organization dedicated to the prevention of family domestic violence. As leader for the organization, Castillo has become nationally and internationally recognized as an expert in the prevention of family domestic violence. She was the first social worker ever assigned to the San Antonio Police Department in their Child Abuse Intervention Project and in their Sex Crimes Unit, Homicide Bureau. Thank you so much, Patricia, for being with us today.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
I know the work that you do is so powerful, but clearly there's a story that started with you before you became an advocate for women and children.
Yeah, I grew up in your typical Mexican-American familia on the west side with hardworking parents that, just really focused on work and family, right? Mm-hmm. And at that time, I'm 62 years old. And so at that time, there really wasn't a big focus on, parenting skills, training, and all of that kind of stuff, right? Mm-hmm. You just did what the previous generations did and raised your kids that way, right? And so my parents were very much about trying to keep us in line and trying to keep us well disciplined. But, the part that was harsh in my family was the hitting. We grew up with a lot of hitting and which I now call abuse, right?
Right.
Because it was harsh. And my parents, eventually realized that what they had done was not good for us. And I think it was like in my 30s or 40s, I can't even remember when, but they sat us all down, all four of us, and told us they were sorry, that they were ignorant, that, they wished they hadn't treated us that way, and that they didn't know any better, and that it was ignorance. It was a lack of information. And that's why in this day and age, when there's so much information for parents, we really have to take advantage of that, and learn how to be a good parent. And it's something that needs to be taught to you. And it's not a thing that happens instinctually when, you become pregnant or you give birth or you become a father. It's something you've got to learn and you've got to study. And so that's part of my upbringing. I also grew up and I'm a survivor of child sexual abuse. And that happened also within the context of my family. And I didn't realize its impact until I was in undergraduate school. And up until then, I think it was buried. I had it buried inside of me. And I used to be a lifeguard. That was my part-time job when I was in undergraduate school. Mm-hmm. And I used to swim at Our Lady of the Lake University. That's where I went to school. And I was a lifeguard there. And hardly anybody ever came swimming. So I'd spent my whole days swimming laps. I used to be real thin back then. I loved it. But there was a woman who would swim there with me, and she was learning how to be a therapist. And she invited me to be her guinea pig. And I agreed. I said, sure, I'll help you. She was like, if you'd help me, I really would appreciate it. I need to practice these skills in order to be able to graduate, with a degree in counseling. And that's how I began my journey as somebody that partook of counseling and therapy. And it is there where I felt safe, and I felt that I could talk about my life as a kid. And that was where my journey began to healing. And it was by pure accident, and it was by pure, me thinking that I was helping my friend who I used to swim laps with. And I'm very grateful to her, by the way. Her name is Charlie Love, and we used to swim laps together, and she became my therapist.
Wow.
That was before 1980. That was like 78. Yeah, like 77, 78, when I started my journey, in therapy and in healing. And I stopped after a little while, right? And once I started doing social work, though, that begins to try you. That begins to challenge you. And I didn't end up in social work jobs that were easy. I ended up, like I was in the frying pan and I went into the fire with the kind of work that I started doing at a very young age. I mean, my first internship was at an agency that took me to the women's shelter of Bexar County. And that's where I got hooked on the issue of family violence. And honestly, I had no idea that the issue of family violence was an issue, because thank God and all the heavens that my father and my mother were never involved in a violent, abusive relationship. And my father loved my mother very much, and my mother loved him very much. And so I never saw that kind of stuff between my parents. But I did learn through my internship that it was I'll never forget, my teacher says, "Do you want to go to the battered women's shelter?" And I said, "The what?" And she goes, "The battered women's shelter." And I said, "What's that?" And she goes, "You don't know about the battered women's shelter?" And I said, "No, ma'am, I don't." And she goes, "Well, that's where," I said, what do you need that for? And she goes, "That's where women go that get beat up by their husbands." And I said, "We need a place like that?"
Oh my God.
And she goes, "Oh yeah, we need a place like that." And I was shocked, because I think in undergraduate school at that time in the 70s, the most we had studied about family violence was maybe like a paragraph in one of my books on human behavior or something, Mm-hmm. It wasn't something that really stood out at all. And so that was my opening to the issue of family violence. And from there came all my other jobs that exposed me and connected me to, violence in families, violence in relationships. Even when I was a community organizer on the East Side, we were looking at environmental issues. And so we had to do a lot of canvassing and talking to people in neighborhoods. And I swear to you, like every third house that I knocked at, there was somebody who would open the door with a black eye or a busted lip. And, I couldn't help myself. I would always say, "What happened to your face?"
Yeah.
And people would respond, people would tell you their story. And, I kept being exposed to the issue over and over again. And so when you're challenged with that kind of, violence everywhere, you begin to feel it. If your body's been victimized, you begin to feel it. You've got open wounds where that kind of triggering has a place to go. And that's what started happening to me, was I started to get triggered because of all the violence I was seeing and victimization I was seeing from people in the community. And so no matter where I went, there was somebody who was, had been a victim of domestic violence, a victim of sexual violence. I mean, it was everywhere. And I tried very hard to not go work at the women's shelter. And my friends kept inviting me to come work over there. And I used to like not take their calls, and I used to run from them and stuff. And somehow or another, I ended up having to take the job at the women's shelter. And then that put me in there big. And that really hooked me, being around the survivors, being around their families. At that time, the shelter was like a big house, and they lived there. And they would let us come in and do our work in their house because they ran everything. The survivors ran everything. They ran the kitchen, they ran the childcare, they ran, the chores, they ran everything. And it was like, they would just give us permission to have an office in their house. And I loved it. I loved the arrangement that way because we got to help people. But that too became very challenging. I also, at that point, because it was such hard work in the 80s and there was not a lot of community support at that time, I turned to drinking. I used to drink a lot, and that sure didn't help. But that too was tied to being triggered and not having completely healed from the sexual trauma of my childhood. So I had to deal with that, and I eventually ended up back in therapy. And it wasn't until the third time that I got into therapy in the 90s that I was able to really tap into the whole issue of child sexual abuse as it played out in my life. And the therapist that I had at that time was excellent therapist. And she made me feel completely safe and allowed me to be very vulnerable in her presence. And I got to the core issue in my life, which was the sexual trauma that I'd experienced and that I'd never really given myself permission to speak about and to expose and to bring up and to, to look at it and to feel it and to sense it and then eventually to purge it, to get rid of it. So I now identify it as a thing that happened to me in my childhood, but it's part of my identity, and it's a small part of my identity, but nevertheless, it was something that I was able to turn into a source of strength, into a source of power, and into a source of victory, because that experience had the power to kill me, because I could have really stayed on that path of drinking. And I could have stayed, become, one of the inmate women that I used to work with at the Bexar County Jail. If I'd have stayed on the path of drinking and putting my life at risk, because you do when you're not, in control of what happens to your body, and how you, carry that in your body, then it controls you and it dominates you. And so to me, I feel victorious over that, and I feel that I didn't allow it to make me its victim. So I'm a survivor. It also had the potential to destroy my relationship with my family, and it did for a while. I didn't appreciate at all how my family responded when I was able to tell them why I didn't want to go to certain family functions or be around certain family members. And so when I was finally able to be honest with them, their response to me was not what I'd expected. And it was very traumatizing to me. And so I got away from my family for a while. But I needed that time for myself, and I needed it to heal, and I needed it to put things into perspective. And my therapist was awesome. She was like, what you have to remember, Patricia, is that your mother, handles things as best as she can with the resources she had. Mm-hmm. And, my mom had an 8th grade education. She was a brilliant woman, but she didn't have, she didn't graduate from high school. Eventually she got a GED. She certainly didn't take any college. And I eventually became my mom's teacher, is what she told me. She goes, you, once we were able to rebuild our relationship, she goes, I've learned so many things from you, mija. If it wasn't for you, I wouldn't know how to deal with these things and how to respond and how to accept them, because for a while there, she was mad at me because I would talk about that experience in my childhood. And I'm like, I have nothing to be ashamed of, Mama, and I don't carry that stuff in my body as a shameful thing. And that's something that was done to me, and it is not my shame. And I am not going to own it. And I'm not embarrassed about anything. I was a child when that happened to me. Mm-hmm. And you cannot lay that on me. That kind of shame does not belong to me, and I refuse to own it. And I said, and it had the potential to destroy my relationship with you, but I decided that I would love you instead. And when I chose to love you instead, that to me is a sign of victory over what that could have done to our relationship. It could have made me hate you for the rest of my life. And I refused to allow that to happen to our relationship. And, it opened my mom's eyes to a whole other way of looking at this and of accepting it. And I had to tell her too, I said, Mom, this is not your shame. This is not your cross to bear, so to speak. This is something that, you would have never thought that, one of our family members would have done that to me. That was like the farthest thing from your mind. And so it wasn't as if you knew that was going to happen to me and then you went and put me there. That's not what happened. And I told her that's why you have to, take it as a life experience that occurred, but it doesn't have to define us. It doesn't get to define us. It doesn't get to identify us. It doesn't get to become a part of our identity. Okay. And, and so when she thought about all of that kind of stuff in that way, I think it was liberating for her. And I think it freed her up. And so we continued to, have a good relationship. And until the day she died, I was at her side. And so we rebuilt and we came back stronger than ever. And, I'm very proud of that work, of being able to overcome that and turn it into fuel for my work in community. Mm-hmm. That was the other thing that I wanted to make sure I was able to do, was to be sober, to do this kind of work in my community. So in the 90s was when I quit drinking. 1995 was when I quit drinking. 1996 was when I quit smoking cigarettes. I was addicted to tobacco as well. And I gave that up in 1996. On June 6th, 1996 is when I did it. And when that day hit, I don't know why, it just popped into my head. Today is June 6th, 1996. And it's the 666, and I'm going to quit smoking today and laugh in the face of the devil.
Wow.
And that's what I did. And that's how I freed myself from those addictions.
That is, your testimony is so powerful. It's, you touched on so many things. One, it's very unusual for parents, especially Mexican parents, being that they grew up in the time that they did, to ask their children or bring them together and take accountability for the physical abuse that they put on you, and then to later discover and go deeper into your sex trauma and be able to have that conversation with your mom. You mentioned that when you were going through therapy, when you confronted your family about the sex trauma, oftentimes families don't hold space for that properly, and that causes even more trauma. So, you had wonderful therapists that were guiding you in the right direction, and you had the strength inside of you to disconnect for that period of time, for you to go through that inner reflection. And I just want to commend you for all the personal work that you've done on yourself to get to the place where you are now. It's not easy, overcoming addictions. You were, like you said, you were being put into the fire in the line of work that you were in, and you noticed that it was starting to trigger you. And you mentioned you were feeling it in your body. And, therapy in terms of holistic therapy, there's the mind and the body, and they are interconnected. And there's so much information out there now that trauma does, impact the nervous system. It impacts the neural, wiring of us, and that pain gets trapped in the body.
Right.
What were was it purely talk therapy that allowed you to really purge? I love the word purge, because we do have to release and all of this pain and suffering that's inside of us that really is tied to, like you said, our identity, and it ends up impacting our personality, or how we speak, how we think, and we don't even realize how it's impacting us on such a deep subconscious level.
Right.
So what were some of the body things that you did, or really was it just the talk therapy itself that helped you purge it from your body? Because a lot of times people do movement.
Since I had been in therapy twice before, it kind of, those two previous experiences, therapeutic experiences, kind of laid the foundation for me, right? To then get into this final phase of healing that happened in the 90s. And by then I just needed to be able to say it. I hadn't even been able to say it, what had happened to me. And my second therapist was a woman named Diane Stevens, and she says, you have spent all this time, Patricia, and you come and see me and you dance around an issue, and it's just right in the center of your life, and you just keep dancing around it. And I couldn't give myself permission to actually verbalize with words what I was getting at. And so we ended up ending our therapeutic work, she and I, but we knew, both of us, that it was unfinished. And so when I took on this job at the P.E.A.C.E Initiative, I knew that it was going to be the most challenging work of my life. And I wanted to be strong. I wanted to be sober. I wanted to be healed. I wanted to be prepared to handle the challenges of doing this work in San Antonio. San Antonio is very traditional and very machista and very Mexican and rooted in patriarchy. And when you challenge those power structures, they come at you. They come at you because they don't like for you to be challenging, the power structure. And when you're saying that, mostly men, I'm not saying only men, but mostly men are, beating up women and children, and they can no longer do that, the power structure is going to fight you. And it's going to resist you. And so you have to be a strong person to deal with that kind of resistance. And I knew that if I was still drinking, I was not going to be able to handle that. And it's why I decided to get myself back into therapy and to fortify myself.
Absolutely.
I knew I had to fortify myself.
Yes.
So
you had to be mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually strong.
Yes.
And sound for you to do the work that God was calling you to do in those places where you were going to be met with so much opposition. And I do have a question about, I know there's so many support groups and organizations that help women and children. And are there any organizations specifically for men, or do you still feel like that's underfunded? Because we tend to try to teach women how to get strong and how to get away and how to protect themselves. But where is really the main, I feel like we need to get into the psyche of the men. It's a lot of this aggression and this rage. It's this old paradigm, they're just repeating what they saw. And because men have been conditioned to not express themselves and hold so much emotion in and have to be strong, I feel like it's all of that trapped pain inside. Are there any groups for men? And when are we going to start focusing on healing the men?
Well, we are focusing on healing the men.
Okay.
But to your statement, there definitely is nowhere near the amount of services that are needed to help the situation that men face.
Right.
Nowhere near. I mean, it is minuscule what we have. You know, when you consider what men have been through, remember that our prison system, our prison industrial complex is busting at the seams with mostly black and brown men that are filling our prison system. You know, we are highly overrepresented in the prison industrial complex and the punishment industrial complex. It's a money-making operation that, because we're not focusing on men and investing in men, what we do is we sacrifice the men to the prison industrial complex.
Exactly.
And I, for one, you know, eventually I learned that I had to start serving men and working with men, because that's what my clients had been telling me all along. You know, when can you help me help him stop hitting me?
Oh, and then the level of like radical compassion and understanding that you have to have when working with those individuals is also really important.
It's very important, because listen to me, I grew up in the you know, white women's feminist movement. White women were my teachers. And at that time, you know, in the 70s and the 80s, the feminists were, you know, Latinas hadn't really, a lot of Latinas hadn't identified as feministas, right? The Chicanas and the Mexicoamericanas, they had not identified as feministas, right? But because I got exposed to this work of family violence, you know, I started working with, you know, feminist women, and influenced by Chicanas, which, you know, at that time the Chicanas were considered radical también, right? And so their way of thinking was, the men are the enemy. You don't work with the men. You don't talk to the men. You don't have anything to do with the men, because they're the enemy. And so you know, that was my underpinning. That was my foundation. And so I had to do like a huge cultural paradigm shift to give myself permission to talk to men and listen to men and work with men. And at that time, that was in the early 90s also, when I got associated with the National Latino Alliance for the Elimination of Domestic Violence. And one of the underpinnings of that work was men and women, Latinos, working together to save our families, because that's what our culture is. Familia. And so, you know, I had to give myself, you know, permission to talk to the men, to listen to them. And it was tough. It wasn't easy. You know, we would butt heads all the time. Nos peleábamos, right? We used to have you know, arguments and fights, and we had to, you know, the men you know, men get into a space and they take it all up if you let them. And so, you know, and so we would have to call them off their pedestals. Hey, you know, get off your pedestal and get over here, you know, because the work is down here. You know, quit talking trash up there and get over here, you know, and thank God that they were, you know, they knew that. They realized, you know, that that they had to, that was like taught to them to be that way, right? But, you know, together we were able to forge a very powerful working relationship. And so we do have some services, Janie, like here in San Antonio, we have the Fatherhood Campaign. We have the, you know, National Compadres Network is brought in on occasion, depending on the funding, to come and do work here and share their curriculums with us and work with the men here and training more men. We have the Children's Shelter has a Compadre to Compadre program. The Avance program also has a fatherhood component, a fatherhood, you know, aspect to their work. But again, it's not enough.
I know. And you know,
not enough.
I have a handful of clients that are men, and most of them have been sexually abused by men and women, and a handful of them are abused by their wives. You know, they ended up, in an abusive relationship with a narcissistic woman and just mentally,
Mm-hmm.
emotionally, and some of them physically abused, and
Yep.
when you go to their story and you go into their childhood, you see that was a similar experience they had maybe with their mother. And so we end up attracting it. So men are also abused too. And you said it earlier, it's not just the women, but there's so much shame. We all carry shame. Those of us that have a sex trauma or abuse, it's hard to get help because of the shame. And
Yeah.
men have it even worse because of the culture that says, you got to be tough and you don't need to get help and all this. And also it's embarrassing to say, oh, a woman is beating me up. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. So they suffer in silence. And then the only emotions that our society gives them permission to express is aggression, violence, and brutality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, anger.
And when they do that, everybody's like, ándale, ese sí es un macho, and they get all these porras, and, everybody pats them on the back, and the family goes and bails them out of jail every time they, sock somebody in the face, and,
Right.
and we reinforce it.
Absolutely.
We reinforce it. And so, there's a lot of work to be done, Janie, a lot of work, and a lot of funding is needed. I too, the men that I work with, I'm shocked at, first of all, one of the things that really blows me away is them saying, because we ask them when we do their intake, have you ever been a victim of sexual abuse or sexual violence, in your life? And they say, you know what, I have, but nobody's ever asked me that before.
Wow. Yeah, it's important.
And so it's like, not only are they, first time revealing, because they've already gotten in trouble with the law and they've already been arrested for domestic violence. And then, we're doing the intake. And so they're revealing that they're a survivor of sexual trauma, but in fact, nobody has ever asked them about that ever in any kind of a setting. And so they're like in their 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s, and they're just now saying something to someone about it for the first time.
Wow. And it's so beautiful that you've experienced that with them, because you're the right kind of person you to hold safe space. You mentioned the word safe, and that's so major when anybody is seeking any kind of therapy. It's like you want to be with somebody who creates that safe space for you so that you can be vulnerable, because vulnerability, that whole word needs to be, the context around it and the meaning around it, it's got a bad rap. And to me, you can't have authenticity without vulnerability and humility.
Exactly.
And it's important for all of us to learn how to express ourselves, and how to emotionally regulate. One of the projects that I have is called Real Talk, Real Men. I featured on Rise Above TV, and REAL is an acronym for responsible, empathetic, accountable, and loyal. I'm really doing my part and whatever I can to bring gentlemen together. I feel like the word gentle and gentleman is important for us to understand. They're here to be protectors and providers and leaders, but they really have to have that wholeness to themselves, that balance of their masculinity and their femininity, and understand what it means to be a real man. It's like mindfully redefining masculinity. And God has brought these amazing men into my life that are in my field or people that I've worked with and friends. And we gather once a month online. And that's a project that I recently started. So just want to let people know it's a great way to listen to other men that are being vulnerable and are being expressive and not being embarrassed or shameful about maybe their ignorances, and how they've healed, and how they're really here to protect women and
well, and I know some great guys that would be awesome on that program. So, if you ever need, some guidance in terms of, guys that are doing some good work and that could really host a conversation about this stuff for other men.
Yeah.
Be happy to help.
Absolutely. That would be awesome. We touch on so many wonderful things here. And I know that, you're connected in a lot of ways with a lot of different organizations, but if anybody was interested in getting in contact with you or wanting to get information, what would be the best way for them to do that?
Well, they're welcome to call the organization. We're still up and running in this pandemic. And by the way, inside the COVID-19 pandemic is the shadow pandemic of domestic violence. And, we're seeing horrible numbers in that area. And so please, encourage your listening audience to seek help and to not be held back by shame and fear. Because people are dying at record-breaking numbers in domestic violence in our city, and people are in danger. But they can call the P.E.A.C.E Initiative at 210-533-2729. Our website is up and running at thepeinitiative.net. There's information there in English and Spanish, and people are welcome to gather information from there. But definitely if folks need to call us, ask us questions, seek some guidance, find out about services, they're more than welcome to give us a call.
Thank you. Can you think of anything else before we wrap up?
Just that I think it's important for people to, acknowledge your pain and suffering, and that we've all been through, some form of trauma or another, but, we don't have to let it define us and become our identity. We can overcome these things. We have the power to do so. And I would just like to challenge anybody and everybody, and especially those of us that are going into the helping professions, do that work, because it'll change the way you interact with the people that you serve. And that's a very important part of being a servant leader in your community.
That's wonderful advice. I want to thank you, Patricia, for being with us today. You are officially a part of the Sacral Circle Sisterhood and Brotherhood.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me.
And thank you to our beautiful listeners for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe to the Sacred Stories podcast on iTunes, where you'll find other impactful, inspiring shows. Connect with us via social media. Just search at the Sacral Circle. Your likes and shares are greatly appreciated because they help spread the love. As we say goodbye, always remember to know your worth and continue to love and value yourself wholeheartedly. Peace be in you.